Before we begin, make sure you watch until the end, because once you hear the name mentioned in this story, you'll understand why some secrets were never meant to be opened. Li Wei had always been captivated by the urban legends circulating in Beijing, particularly those surrounding Museum 798. By day, the museum pulsed with light, showcasing modern art, unique installations, and bustling crowds, but the whispers claimed that nighttime was a different beast altogether. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the museum's interior lights began to dim, many reported sensing an unsettling aura, some even claiming to witness things that defied reason. Li Wei, with a curiosity that outweighed his caution, finally agreed to join his two friends, Chen Hao and Zhang Lili, in exploring the museum after dark, despite the warnings that echoed in his mind. That night, the streets leading to Museum 798 were eerily deserted. Streetlights cast elongated shadows onto the cracked pavement. A frigid wind blew in from the east, piercing skin and penetrating the layers of their jackets. Li Wei inhaled sharply, sensing the strange night air, as if the universe itself was urging them to turn back. Chen Hao, usually the most daring among them, walked ahead with a light and confident stride, yet a line of tension etched his face, a sight rarely seen. Zhang Lili stared at the museum's massive, imposing doors with hesitation, her lips trembling slightly. The main doors were crafted from ancient wood, enormous and heavy. As they pushed them open, a prolonged creak reverberated through the entrance hall, amplifying the oppressive silence. Li Wei felt his heart pound faster the moment they stepped inside. The scent of stale dust, peeling paint, and the damp aroma of wood and concrete assaulted their senses. It felt as though they had entered a living entity, breathing, waiting for them to make the slightest misstep. The first corridor they traversed was long and shrouded in darkness. Neon lights in the ceiling were either dead or flickering erratically, casting their shadows on the floor in a bizarre and unsettling manner. The shadows seemed to move independently of their own steps. Li Wei tried to convince himself that it was merely a trick of the light, but a small, insistent voice inside his chest screamed that something was amiss. Chen Hao continued to lead the way, his eyes scanning every corner with a meticulousness that made Lily shudder. Li Wei glanced at Zhang Lili, who appeared to be holding her breath, her eyes darting around, registering every movement in the gloom. A subtle but palpable sense of dread hung in the air, raising goosebumps on their skin. They pressed onward, their footsteps echoing on the wooden floor, creating prolonged and eerie reverberations, as if the building itself was mimicking their movements, but with a slower, heavier, more sinister rhythm. At the end of the corridor, they discovered a room that stood apart from the others. An old wooden door with frosted glass bore the inscription Yu Menglong's old archive. A palpable sense of unease washed over Li Wei the moment he touched a doorknob. Zhang Lili gasped, her eyes widening. Many old tales circulated about this room. Some claimed to feel the presence of something watching them the moment they entered it at night. Li Wei forced a thin smile, attempting to sound brave. He said it was just an old wives' tale, but his heart hammered in his chest. Something compelled him to enter, like an invisible magnet, drawing him into that darkened room. As the door swung open, the air inside the room felt different, heavier, colder. The scent of old paper, decayed wood, and thick dust filled their nostrils. The room was lined with tall shelves overflowing with old documents and photographs. Some photo frames were shattered, some documents were tattered, and some small statues seemed to stare as if they wanted to speak. The atmosphere was unnerving. Li Wei felt an indescribable pressure, as if every step they took was being monitored by unseen eyes. Chen Hao, usually the most composed, suddenly became silent. He walked slowly, his eyes fixed on the shelves, refraining from uttering a single word. On one of the shelves, Li Wei spotted a photograph that caught his attention. A young man with a pale face, neatly combed black hair, and a subtle smile that seemed to conceal secrets the world was not meant to know. Something in the photograph made Li Wei pause. An odd sensation pierced him. As if the man's eyes were following his every move, it didn't feel like merely looking at a photograph. It felt like being judged by something unseen. The atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. Only the sound of their footsteps could be heard, but it sounded different, heavier, slower than their own steps. From the corner of the room came a faint voice, almost inaudible, calling Li Wei's name. Li Wei, Li Wei. He turned, but the room was empty. Zheng Lili stared at him with a pale face, while Chen Hao merely offered a stiff smile, trying to convince themselves that it was just a trick of the mind. But all three shared the same feeling. Something was watching, unseen, but real. Stop now if you're scared, but if you really want to know what happened to Yu Menglong, press like and continue. There's no turning back after this. They ventured further into the room, the flashlight in Li Wei's hand illuminating every corner, but the dark shadows always moved faster than they did. Li Wei's breathing became labored. His head felt tight, and a sudden gust of cold wind swept from the direction of the shelves. Chen Hao felt something touch his back, but when he turned around, there was no one there. The oppressive atmosphere intensified, raising goosebumps and tightening their brains. Li Wei felt his head throb, his eyes began to water, and his body yearned to flee, but his curiosity was too strong to resist. In the center of the room, Li Wei saw an old wooden desk. On it lay an open, tattered diary, its pages filled with neat handwriting. Some words were difficult to decipher, some sentences seemed like incantations, but one name was clearly printed. Yu Menglong. Li Wei's heart pounded in his chest. His hands trembled as he touched the book. There was a strange sensation, as if the book were alive, wanting to tell him something. Zhang Lili tugged at Li Wei's arm gently, whispering, "Don't hold it too long." But Li Wei found it difficult to tear his gaze away. The ceiling lights flickered violently. The shadows on the walls seemed to move on their own, independent of their movements. The tension reached its peak. A faint shadow emerged in the corner of the room, indistinct but clear, making the air feel cold and shiver. Li Wei felt his body grow heavy, each step seeming to be held back by something unseen. Chen Hao stared at him with wide eyes. "Li Wei, let's get out of here," he said, his voice almost trembling. They struggled to escape the room, step by step, feeling as if they were being held back by invisible hands. As soon as the door closed, silence returned, but the oppressive feeling did not dissipate. Their breaths were ragged, their bodies drenched in cold sweat. Li Wei stared at the photograph that was still imprinted in his mind, the diary that felt alive, and the faint shadow that seemed to follow them out. They all knew that whatever had happened in that room was not merely shadows or imagination. Something was following them, and it was real. Since that night, Li Wei couldn't shake the experience. Every time he tried to tell someone about it, the words seemed to catch in his throat. He realized that something from Museum 798 that night had clung to him and his friends. Something that was not to be named. Something that would never leave them completely. Something that was waiting in the darkness. He realized this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The next night, that entity might return, waiting patiently to take what it believed was rightfully its. Li Wei went to sleep, closing his eyes, but the nightmares had already begun even before he was fully aware. That faint white shadow, the subtle smile of the man in the photograph, the rustling wind that called his name, they all surfaced in his mind, pressing down on him. He realized that Museum 798 was not just a place, it was a space where the past and restless spirits met, and those who were brave enough to enter at night would face something more than just a horror story. Li Wei shifted his face, staring into the darkness of the bedroom, trying to convince himself that he was just too tired, but that faint voice returned, indistinct but clear. "Li Wei, don't forget me. A cold shiver ran down his spine. And he knew. The entity was waiting. Waiting patiently, waiting for the next night. Something in Museum 798 had decided that Li Wei and his friends should not be free so easily, that night was only the beginning of a long journey filled with fear and loss. Li Wei knew that tomorrow, he would not only face his own fears, he would face something far more dangerous, something that could steal more than just his sense of security. The museum did not only hold works of art, it held memories, secrets, and spirits that never rested, and the entity that now clung to them was a terrifying messenger. The message was clear. Anyone who spoke the name of Yu Menglong in this museum at night would never truly be safe again. This story isn't over. If you want the next chapter, comment continue. Hit like and subscribe, because after this, we'll enter the darkest side of the Yu Menglong legend.